The year is 1995, and the deadly Motaba virus has decimated a small village in Zaire. After a smuggled capuchin monkey carries the virus across the sea to a small town in California, a team of military and medical experts race against time to contain the outbreak. Dustin Hoffman plays Colonel Sam Daniels, a virologist who struggles not only to stop the virus, but also to expose a government conspiracy. The military initially plans to bomb the infected town to prevent further spread, prioritizing secrecy over human lives. As panic rises and the infection worsens, Daniel searches for the original host to create a cure. The film highlights themes of scientific responsibility, government overreach, and the ethical dilemmas faced during public health crises. With an all-star cast including Rene Russo, Morgan Freeman, and Donald Sutherland, the film joins other 90s disaster films that teeter on the edge of full-blown melodrama. This week on Back to the Balcony, we cover 1995's Outbreak. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. I tell you, man, I loved this kind of era of 90s disaster movies. We had Twister, Volcano, Dante's Peak. Outbreak was like the big virus movie. And then 98, we had the two Comet movies. We had Deep Impact and Armageddon. It was almost like back to the 70s of these disaster movies, the Irwin Winkler movies, where there was an earthquake, a meteor, an avalanche, right? And Outbreak was the one that dared to be R-rated and dared to be a little bit more vicious in its storytelling and special effects and grossness. And I tell you what, this movie slapped when I was a teenager, right? We loved Outbreak. We loved the fact, the government wouldn't bomb a city. Well, now we think they probably would, right? But I tell you what, I haven't watched this movie in a very long time, and I was prepared to defend it and all of its 90s disaster movie melodramatic tropes. And listening to our critics, I gotta tell you, I started siding with the one that was a little disappointed in it, because upon a rewatch, I was kind of disappointed in it. And a lot of my qualms with the movie are the qualms that the one critic has about it as well. I think there's casting opportunities. I think there is definitely this weird shift in tone with the movie where it doesn't really know what kind of movie it wants to be because it doesn't commit fully to the melodramatic 90s or 70s disaster film. But at the same time, it wants to be a popcorn movie. It's a lot more scattered than I remembered, and maybe I was just a little bit more, ADD teenager when I watched it, and that's why I loved it so much. But on this viewing, I'm not going to say I hated it, but I was really let down because the nostalgia didn't stick. What about you?
I'm kind of in the same boat where it's been a while since I've rewatched this, but at the same time, I hear you, I hear the critics, but I don't care because it is absolutely fun. It's popcorn entertainment. It takes a fear that we all have, just like a lot of disaster movies of the 90s, and it goes all in. And I think you're right. Towards the back half of the movie, there's some ridiculousness to it, but there isn't a moment from when I remember seeing it as a first-time view to now that I wasn't on the edge of my seat. This is the brilliance of Wolfgang Petersen, is he knows how to do action. He knows how to do thrills without just special effects. He knows how every cut, every transition needs to entertain the audience. And I love 90s disaster films. And you mentioned Armageddon. That's the one exception. I fucking hated that movie. But with...
Yeah, me too. We won't do that one on the show.
But there is a charm to a lot of these 90s movies that it taps into the pivotal moment of fear. And we get that prominent here, where we have even a moment that I think is so subtle in this movie, but it is prominent, where we have even having French fries being taken while walking, where you're like, ew, germs. You have the movie theater that I thought was brilliant because everybody in the theater watching this at the time of release is probably looking at each other in the theater saying, gross.
Yeah.
So there is some brilliance to how this movie entertains, and there's an appreciation to it. And I agree, and we'll get into it with our critics, but there is no doubt that this movie is pure popcorn entertainment, and it's successful in that.
Yeah, the popcornness of it is exactly why I can't hate it, because it is entertaining all the way throughout. Now, it does do what I kind of gave the movie Face Off a little bit of flack for upon rewatches later, is that it does kind of fall apart in that last act. Like that third act is kind of a drag. The fact that there's like over 45 minutes of the movie that's in the helicopter of them flying around, that's a lot to ask. Like, I did not need that much time between Dustin Hoffman and Cuba Gooding Jr. just flying around in a little helicopter, and then it turns on to like a full Rambo battle, helicopter versus helicopter. That was a little bit of a suspension of disbelief for me, but I let it pass. But the one thing that I really dug upon this rewatch is the fact that it introduces you to all these characters that are just like kind of doomed. And that's where it really focuses on the 70s type disaster movie. Because movies like Volcano and Dante's Peak, they don't really do that. You stick with the same people the whole time. What this movie does is it introduces you to a slew of characters that are pretty much like vessels for the virus. And then the virus travels along and these people die, and then you're on with the main group. I like that. I like where you have a misdirect at the beginning of the movie, let's say the first act and a half, and then you really focus in on your core group, and then, it turns into whatever it is. But I dug that. The fact that like Patrick Dempsey is a big part of this movie, like the main part of how the virus gets spread, yet he's got like 10 minutes, if that, of screen time. And I like that. It really throws back to the old disaster airport airplane movies of the 70s. I kind of wanted more of that throughout the movie. So like the first half I really dug. Now, we'll get into the critics discussion because I don't want to like double down on the qualms that I have about this. But I will focus on one particular thing that they do talk about, and that's casting. I didn't really have one opinion or another about Dustin Hoffman in this role back in the 90s in the theater, because I like Dustin Hoffman in everything, a year or two after this, he did Wag the Dog, which is a great movie. Like, I think he had a lot of great performances in the 90s. But I did get a little bit of weirdness from him in this performance where I felt it didn't match. And as I watched his chemistry with Rene Russo and his chemistry with everyone else in the movie, what I realized is what I wanted his character to be was Tommy Lee Jones from Volcano. That's who I wanted it to be, but that's not who it is. And by the end of the movie, when he's like talking tough and doing all this stuff in the helicopter, it just didn't feel right. Now, granted, Roger does have a nice rebuttal to this in his conversation with Gene later on, but I really will have to say that I do think there is a miscasting there. It's not a bad performance. It just doesn't feel right to me. That was my biggest issue watching this movie, is all the way through, especially the last half. Dustin Hoffman just didn't feel right to me. He felt miscast. Just like we've talked about, we haven't covered the movie yet, but how I feel he was severely miscast in the movie Sphere. I think he's like one of the worst parts of that movie. And I don't know, I felt the very same way here. It's like, does this role really belong to him,
And I'm going to disagree. I think Dustin Hoffman owns this role. I think the main feeling we get with this is the chemistry between Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo. The chemistry doesn't match, and that's not an individual performance. I think it's equal on both parts because they both have different visions of this role, but it never really comes together. I think when it comes to an entertainment level, I'm engulfed in Dustin Hoffman's performance. And you brought up Tommy Lee Jones from Volcano, but I was getting Gene Hackman from Crimson Tide vibes from Dustin Hoffman almost.
I would have happily taken Gene Hackman in this
100%.
role too. Granted, they probably would have put him in the Donald Sutherland role, but still, he could have done both.
But I think where Dustin Hoffman, I think he does better in the entertainment aspect in the second half of the movie than he does in the sentimental aspect in the first half of the movie. And I think that's where we don't get the real buy-in from it. When he doesn't have a clear interpretation of how the family values the divorce aspect works. He kind of is just very structured in the first half of the movie. And he's like, okay, I'm here. Let's get to the entertainment. And then
Right.
he just does a solid job on delivering fast paced lines when it comes to the delivery in the second half. And the second half is where the movie, to your point, does falter. But that's where Dustin Hoffman owns the screen and the entertainment element. He does drive the
Yeah.
second half of the movie. But when it comes, again, to the chemistry between the first act, Rene Russo and Dustin Hoffman, they just don't work together. It's almost like an oddball visually, and it's an oddball when it comes to back and forth dialogue. There's nothing real of substance or emotional stake to really have an earned chemistry towards the last act.
Right, and that might be like an intentional juxtaposition because they're divorcing, right? Like apparently they don't work together as a couple and they have conflicts of interest in the work and probably battles of ego cuz she wants to essentially have his job in the government which he has with the military. And so yeah, it does make sense that there is like not really good chemistry there and the script kind of fixes that by making them a divorcing couple who really have no chemistry whatsoever. Maybe they were just like work buddies that spent almost time together and they grew into like a romantic relationship out of that, but it was never meant to last. Okay, I will give the movie that. The chemistry between him and Cuba Gooding Jr., though, is actually pretty damn good. Like, I like those two together. And Cuba's part, if you kind of just look at it on paper, is very stereotypical cliche. There's not a lot of depth there. He's just the new guy. He's the newbie. He has no experience in the field, but he's got a lot of confidence. And then he's shaken when he sees the results of the virus. And he spends the rest of the movie kind of like trying to compensate for that moment of weakness. He does a lot with a very little role. And then the two of them together, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that makes the rest of the movie work is you spend all that time in the helicopter with them. If they don't have a good chemistry or rapport together, then that's just dead in the water filmmaking. And then they don't. They actually are really, really good. On that same note, Donald Sutherland and Morgan Freeman have excellent chemistry together. The scenes where the two of them are kind of going head to head and having banter. And there's not like a lot of screen time, but there is a lot of scenes of them together. That's good chemistry. So maybe that's why I'm kind of being a little bit judgmental about the Rene Russo Dustin Hoffman, is that all the other characters are really in sync. Even Kevin Spacey with Dustin Hoffman, and even him with Rene Russo, they're in sync. There's just something about the two leads that don't really work for me. But again, the movie kind of fixes itself around that problem.
I think the main problem between all the characters in the first half of the movie is just it's too casual, and it's too casual for its own good. Because we do
Right.
have Kevin Spacey that, has a body language of relaxed during a crisis. You do have the dialogue that supports just very structured meet and greet kind of shake hands, kiss babies. It's really nothing that really leads back into the back half of the movie to really build a stake with the chemistry. And I will agree to an extent that the Cuba Gooding Jr. and Dustin Hoffman chemistry is good, but this is where I thought it could have gone further because you brought up Morgan Freeman and Donald Sutherland. These are two great, fantastic performances that does a lot with little dialogue.
And little screen time.
And little screen time. And then we have Dustin Hoffman that is owning the screen, is overpowering, I think, Cuba Gooding Jr., where
Yeah.
we kind of put ourselves in a spot where does Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character really have an intent to follow Dustin Hoffman? There is a missing element here of almost the father figure or the one you want to follow. There is something missing here to have him say, I'm a new recruit. I'm new on this mission. I'm going to follow this guy, even though I know it's going to cost me my career. There is a missing element to the chemistry there, but given the performances, we buy into it. And that goes into the entertainment value of it is we don't question it because it's so fast paced when it comes to the editing, which is fantastic, in my opinion, with cutting between the dialogue scenes and the action scenes. And I think these two could have gone further when it comes to the build of the chemistry. So I have problems with how the chemistry is built with all the characters if you take away the fantastic casting and the performances because everybody is out to try and kind of just own the scene because they know the stakes that are at hand. It's almost like Wolfgang Peterson said, you all are going to die within 24 hours, action. And that's how these characters are really treating their performances. It's intense, it's direct, and we needed a little bit more of an emotional stake to it to really feel it in the gut.
One of the things that I think I would, okay, how do I do this? One of the comparisons that I made to this movie, being like a popcorn disaster movie, but still having some like real relevant fear elements. Like, we've gone through COVID now. Was COVID as bad as this? In the end of the day, it wasn't. But being able to take a biological disaster like this and make a popcorn movie out of it, then compare it to Soderbergh's Contagion, which is a more realistic, dark, and threatening version of what could happen in a viral outbreak, which is actually more to the truth, which is closer to what we actually lived through with COVID, the isolation, the worldwide scope of it. That's not entertaining to me. It's fear-inducing, it's fear-mongering as filmmaking. There's definitely a place for that, there's a time for that, and if done correctly and done right, like Soderbergh did it, it will have like a real strong emotional response to you. Where this one, I'm not too afraid at the end of the day of the virus. I'm more afraid of the military taking us out with a bomb than I am of the virus. And I think that's kind of the point. The government overreach, the idea to like keep a biological weapon secret and wipe out any evidence of it. They do play that up, and that plays to the 70s conspiracy mindset of the disaster movie. So I do like that, and I feel like it's the perfect time and place for a movie like this in the 90s, in the popcorn era, because if you made it in the 2000s or God forbid the 2010s and 2020s, well then it loses its entertainment value because it's almost tabloid fodder now, right? We've lived it, we read the newspapers, we watched the news, we've heard all the conspiracy theories. The movie loses weight when you add reality to it. So the fact that it is stuck in this realm of entertainment, I think is what does a great service for it in its nostalgia value. I can watch this movie and be entertained, and I don't feel as skeptical or fearful of a viral outbreak as I did back when I watched it. Like, oh, this could really happen. Now that we know what it's like, it can stay in the realm of fantasy.
And I think you said it brilliantly because I think even reflecting on COVID, you know what? This one, I never connected the dots because it's just a viral outbreak. And
Right.
because of its pure entertainment value, we can it's not the stakes that makes this movie entertaining. Yeah, it's the idea. And the first half of the movie does a great job on presenting that idea, but the back half eliminates that idea into pure action. Now, going back to what I remembered about this movie, it wasn't the first half of the movie. It wasn't the government conspiracy. It was one scene. And when you brought it to the table, I reflected saying, I remember one scene of this movie, one shot, one moment. And that is Dustin Hoffman in a helicopter saying, I'm not going to move. You're going to have to do your job. It's a very powerful moment that we see. And I reflected on Crimson Tide to the same moment where you have Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman face to face in a conflict saying, I am not going to follow your orders. So these are pivotal moments in dialogue that overshine in performances and the written material to say the stakes are higher. This Wolfgang Peterson amplifies the dialogue to the stakes being, I'm going against what's right versus wrong versus death versus everything else that's happening in the background. So this is a movie that really does amplify on the entertainment value of we're going to drive this home of the stakes of the characters on screen versus everybody dying in the background. Because when I reflected on this, I remember caring more about what's going to happen in the moment in this helicopter scene or the ridiculousness of Dustin Hoffman going miraculously from the flying the helicopter to the boat to finding this monkey to finding the vaccine in what, a 12-hour period, a 2-hour period? We don't know. But
Yeah, did they have enough fuel for all that flying? That's always what I wondered about that little helicopter.
But it's so condensed where the filmmakers know what they're doing when it comes to building a higher stake versus what the actual stake is at hand. And that's where we have to look at the intent of what this movie is trying to do. Is it trying to prove a point? No, because it ruins the point. It ruins the stakes throughout the movie. The virus, it doesn't matter. It's what our characters are doing and how they're going to accomplish things in a timely manner. This set the world record on a vaccine that saved the world in a matter of a 2-hour movie, and this one even
Right.
more condensed in 15 minutes. So I think that is where we have to look at the intent of what this movie is trying to do.
Okay, so before we get into the critic's opinion, I have to ask you, if you throw all of the 90s disaster flicks on the table, which one is your favorite?
Oh man. Volcano is not without its charm, but it is solely driven by Tommy Lee Jones, but so stupid. Dante's Peak, I think, is underrated. I don't know. Even Deep Impact, if we compared it to Armageddon, is a masterpiece. But if I have to go to rewatch value, pure rewatch value is stupidity, it would have to be Volcano.
Okay, so for me, it's Twister. Like, Twister is the one that I've probably watched more times than anything else. Volcano is a close second. Volcano, though, has my favorite dumb disaster movie line when they're playing rock, paper, scissors. And he's like, I'm not paper, I'm lava. Nothing beats that.
I would totally go with Twister if it wasn't for the stupid leather belt ending. That is just stupid. But again,
How dare you?
they're stupid disaster flicks, but anything with Tommy Lee Jones, it's hard to not be engulfed in. I love a good Tommy Lee Jones movie.
Okay, so let's hear what our critics had to say about this. Gene brought it to the show.
Our first film is Outbreak, and here's a picture with a big star that's drawing big crowds, and I thought Dustin Hoffman, and the story were often ridiculous. In the picture, Hoffman plays an Army colonel involved in disease control, and he and 2 assistants go to Zaire to investigate a plague. I think Dustin Hoffman in his spacesuit looks like he just walked in from a Woody Allen comedy. Another cornball element in the story is that Dustin Hoffman is still involved with his ex-wife, played improbably by the bombshell Rene Russo. And then there's the laughable conclusion, a helicopter battle over disease containment. Sure, the filmmakers felt that they had to make a traditional action picture out of this material because they thought mainstream audiences wouldn't go for the excitement of science. But it's all so silly. I didn't think Dustin Hoffman was the least bit credible as an Army colonel. Rene Russo belongs more with Mel Gibson, as she was in Lethal Weapon 3. Hey, I didn't like much of anything about Outbreak.
Okay, so here's my big conundrum with this, is that I don't think he's wrong about any of those points, right? I think he's right about those points. Where he is wrong, though, is that this movie is supposed to be fun, and you're supposed to suspend your disbelief because it is a disaster yarn. It is a complete and total throwback to the old disaster movies of the 70s. It even does it with like introducing characters on screen, right? It'll have the little typey thing of like so-and-so from Dugway Proving Ground, General so-and-so. Like, it is a narrative very much like that. It's not taking itself overly serious, but he's taking the film overly serious. I think if he was to take a step back and, like you said, look at it at the entertainment and popcorn value of it, then he wouldn't be so critical about the aesthetics that he's pointing out. But like I said, he's not wrong about those. I agree with everything. I agree that Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo are not a correct match. I think that there is a lot of cornball in this movie. But that's the movie. It's not trying to be something different. If it was, then I would be more on his side.
It's hard to go into this movie with, you look at the synopsis, you look at the trailer, and I'm sure, of course, he did. And he's looking at the main aspect of it to be a disaster movie surrounding around a virus and people dying and a moral value to it, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But
there's a little girl that makes friends with the outbreak monkey.
I mean, at one point as a critic, you need to understand where the intent of the movie is going. Right. It's one in my rewatch, I was taken back saying, okay, as we see Dustin Hoffman, Rene Russo, with the dogs that we never see again in the second half of the movie, you know these are not throwaway characters, but you know they're throwaway characteristics that we're just going to ignore all the reality of it and just go full on, full speed, disaster pick spectacle. And this is shocking to me to an extent that with how many of these cheeseball movies of the 90s, he didn't catch on to this. And like you said, he did take it too serious. As a critic, you can see this a mile away of where this movie's going to go. You have the stereotypical characters of divorce, the dogs being separated, so linear, so stereotypical. You know shit's going to happen, and it's intentional that we don't have a huge attachment to these characters because we don't know, as a first-time watch at least, if Dustin Hoffman's going to get it or Rene Russo's going to get it. So that at least lingers the question of who we're going to really root for towards the second half of the movie. And I think Wolfgang Peterson and our writers do a good job on keeping it very linear to say who's going to get it. Okay, Rene Russo's got it. Now Dustin Hoffman's going all in. And we see them, like I said earlier, to own the screen, to build the stakes, to make an intensity of the thrills in the back half of the movie. So I think Gene, you're right, does see it. He does understand it, but not really, because this is an intentional popcorn film.
Maybe the problem is that this was the first of the disaster films of the 90s, and he did not have the environment to, let's say, have that kind of criticism of this genre that had been reintroduced. Because, 96 we have Twister, and Volcano, and Dante's Peak, and then 98 we have the Comet and Meteor movies. If this came out right in the middle of those, then you're already kind of like in this environment of melodramatic disaster movies, and it's easier to see a movie like this at face value. But because it was the first of those, he isn't in that mode yet. He's judging it more as just like a movie and less of this genre that it was like reintroducing us to. Independence Day is kind of a disaster movie in the guise of an alien invasion movie, but it has a lot of disaster movie tropes of destruction and survival and finding the lost loved ones, right? It's a disaster movie on paper, just with aliens instead of a natural thing. So I feel like that might have been the first one to start this wave, but this is the first one that was more grounded in reality. Maybe that's why he hasn't caught on to that yet, because it's still too early.
Well, he didn't like that one either. He didn't like Independence Day. He didn't like a lot of disaster films.
He doesn't like fun, remember?
He is Debbie Downer of movie critics. Just enjoy the ride. I think if we go back, correct me, I think Twister he liked, maybe. But any other, or Deep Impact, I think I'm thinking of. But most of disaster films, he hated because, again, he doesn't understand the assignment of what entertainment is, what a summer blockbuster is going to be. He can't just say, here's a big twister, here's a big meteor, here's a big asteroid, here's a big plague. Just have fun with people dying. That's where I think it's really, he looks at the main topic of disaster and he can't just get engulfed into it. It's like an overhanging theme where we can't have fun with bad news.
Well, we can't speak too soon because of the movie that's coming up next week, but we'll leave that for the end of the episode. Roger jumps in now.
You sure didn't. You must have had a bad day when you saw this movie.
No,
I thought it was terrific entertainment. It really is. And it's very smart at the beginning. You're wrong to say they don't think people are interested in science, because the first hour and 10 minutes has all to do with science, and it's fascinating, including that really interesting tour of the microbiological lab and the way they have different containment areas.
In the beginning, then why do they have to come up with the backstory of him and his wife, Roger? Didn't you think that was kind of silly?
I thought it was pretty well written, actually. And, Rene Russo, to call her a bombshell is kind of insulting. She's a very attractive, mature, smart woman, and I thought she made a good partner for Hoffman. I also
in other words, you thought that was a credible relationship between the two of them?
Why not? Why not? They're both involved in the same academic field, of course. And why wouldn't an Army colonel look like Dustin Hoffman if his area was containing viruses? He shouldn't look like John Wayne. I mean, he spends all of his time looking through a microscope. And I've got another question for you. How should somebody look in one of those suits?
There was only one person that I laughed at. The variable was not the suit. The variable was Dustin Hoffman.
Well, why in the world
Because
shouldn't Dustin Hoffman be
He
able
looks like
to...
Benjamin Braddock in the suit. He looks ridiculous.
I was going to try to get that out of you. I knew that's the identification you were making, and it's not fair to this movie.
Why? It is absolutely fair. That's my reaction to it.
I think if the guy has to put on the suit, let him put on the suit. When he stands inside of it, that's the way he looks.
But he looks silly. Dustin Hoffman has a whole
silly
different...
to you. I think you're the only person in
what
America
am I supposed to do?
that
Say
he looks
give
silly
reviews
to.
of what you think of the picture? I give it a review of what I think.
Start.
And they kind of just revert back into their own classic SISKEL and EBERT. I think this and you think this kind of argument. Roger knows what kind of movie this is, and Roger always kind of knows what movie he's watching for the most part. There are times where he's been proven wrong, but he knows exactly what this movie is, and he's right. Again, like, it kind of goes back to that point where Gene really does not like when actors that he is attached to a certain character or film represent themselves in other ways, right? For him, Dustin Hoffman is always going to be the Graduate. That's just in his brain. We've heard him talk about Dustin Hoffman in many different movies, Hook included, and he just cannot separate Dustin Hoffman from the Graduate. Just like he can't really separate Travolta from Saturday Night Fever. It's just something that he does. He doesn't let certain actors or filmmakers, for that matter, grow or change. He really sees them in a certain light, and he attaches that light to whatever the movie that they're in. And he uses that as a detriment against them. That's what he's doing right here. And then I'm glad that Roger kind of called him out. Like, I don't think that calling Rene Russo a bombshell is necessarily an insult, but it is an inappropriate term for the role that she's playing in this movie. She is a biological disease, whatever scientist. She is essentially a genius level person, and she represents that very well. Just because she's very attractive and has an attitude doesn't mean that she's less valuable. You know, she's not just there for her looks, but that's the way he kind of sounds. I don't think that's his intent. Roger's definitely using that in the argument. But yeah, I feel like he just didn't choose his words wisely in his review of their performances, especially hers.
Well, I think this is where I found the review from Gene very insulting, because even though we're all thinking it at the time, is you take Rene Russo, who he calls a bombshell, and between the lines he's saying, why couldn't we get a better looking man?
Or a less good looking woman.
Yes. So, and we're all thinking it during it, is that's part of the element that's missing. So to an extent, he's not wrong, but at the same time, it's so gross thinking, saying, you know what, let the talent do its thing. And, maybe that's why the chemistry isn't there, is maybe they're trying to coordinate how to make this relationship work. But in a profession like this, we don't need to have two great looking people. We don't need to have two ugly looking people. We don't have to have a mixed match. Just allow these performers, these talents work. You should be critiquing the talent at hand, not critiquing the looks, because we've already had this discussion on this episode where, the chemistry might not be there. We're zeroing in on the talent, the performances, the dialogue. Nowhere did we say, God, how did Dustin Hoffman get with Rene Russo, or vice versa, however you want to look at it? It's irrelevant to this movie. And Gene, in all of our episodes that we've had this conversation, he is the only person to bring this up, to really focus on looks. And that has nowhere in criticism, in film criticism, to say, this is why I didn't like this movie. And I think when it comes to Roger, I think he does go on the defense on it, but I think he allows it too much, because we have this fight on the suits that last way too long. Roger needed to put a stamp on it and say, this is why this movie is thrilling and entertaining, not go on a 1 minute to 2 minute tangent on how Dustin Hoffman looks in a suit. It's a waste of critique. It's a waste of promotion of the movie. And it's a waste of the intent of why people should see this movie.
And earlier when I said that I felt that Dustin Hoffman was miscast, I'm not talking about, let's say, stature, like, oh, he's too short to be a scientist or he's too short to be a military guy. I think it was just more of his energy. Like, the energy does not reflect my personal idea of what that character, a military viral scientist, would be. It doesn't. But that's my problem, right? I'm not going to hold it against the movie and say, oh, you shouldn't watch it because he's miscast. That was just my personal feeling of the movie. Would it affect my critique of a movie if I was actually writing a review? Probably not. I would probably have, like, a asterisk. I feel he was a little miscast in this role, but it doesn't change the fact that the movie's still entertaining, right? That's how I would handle it. So yeah, I think that he is being very picky and cruel about how he is wording his critique, because it doesn't do any service to the performers, and he's not necessarily insulting their performance. He's kind of going after them aesthetically, and Roger's not here for it. And here's the thing, bro. 90% of movies, like, these guys are film critics. 90% of movies are cast unrealistically because people want to see the Julia Roberts, the Meg Ryan. They want to see the aesthetically pleasing female character. And if they don't get the hunky Hollywood star, they want to see that character actor that's not necessarily good looking in a traditional sense, but they bring the charisma, the Dustin Hoffmans, the Al Pacinos, the what have yous, right? That's just what the industry is. So how are you picking on that? And how are you making that a point of contention when that's literally the industry?
Well, I think Gene is really looking at the surface level of this, because if we actually shut our eyes and listen, this isn't a talent issue per se. I think the chemistry could have gone further, but the dialogue sucks in the first half. It's so structured. It's so cliche. It's so, we're a divorced couple. Here we're going to set up the scene. And the dialogue is so simplistic with 1 to 2 sentences back and forth. And Roger's right, is we do get a lot of intrigue of setup where we see the different levels of the lab. And that kind of sets the standard, saying this might be pretty cool. Then we cut to the two, Rene Russo and Dustin Hoffman, and the dialogue is just that we're almost thinking this is what we're going to get for the next hour, 45 minutes to 2 hours. So it's very simplistic, where we should have gotten further. And I spoke to earlier, where it would have led to a bigger climax. So that's where Gene should have focused on it as a critic and said, this may not be a miscast or a chemistry issue. This is a writing problem, because at the end of the day, there's really nothing said between these two that really do build their chemistry. Their banter back and forth, if it's not involving the virus, is 2 sentences to 3 sentences long. It's not enough to really build this chemistry. So this isn't a talent problem. This is a writing problem.
Right. But even so, I think Roger said something very important when he said that he's actually thinks it's well written and well structured, because the way it actually plays out is that the only time it seems that Rene Russo and Dustin Hoffman are actually really in love and there for each other is when they're in crisis, right? But their job is to prevent crisis. So therefore, they have learned that if there's no crisis because they're doing a good job of preventing it, then that magic, that magnetism chemistry isn't there. Yet, throw them in crisis and they're instantly back together again. So it is kind of a conundrum there, where it's like they can't truly be happy if they're doing their jobs right and there's no crisis, because crisis is what makes them love each other. That's a well-written thing, and I think it is pretty obvious in the movie, and I think Gene just didn't see that. All he's seeing is the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and not seeing the subtext between the characters.
Well, keeping the fire going, that's where we should have gotten a cameo from every other disaster movie of the 90s of Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo to keep their marriage alive. Maybe that's what we would have rooted for in Armageddon, if they're standing on top of the comet saying their marriage is going on for another 5-10 years because they're in crisis.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, that's the same plot structure as Twister. If they're not chasing storms, they don't love each other, but put them in a storm.
Thrill seekers.
Then it goes right back. Sparks fly, right? We got to put Twister on the list now. Damn it. I love Twister so much, but like I've been avoiding to put it on there. All right, cool. So let's say with Gene, I'm obviously disappointed in his critique. I'm not disappointed at what he feels about the movie, because the movie does have opportunities. It's the way he decides to go after it and what he chooses to go after. I think it's lazy, and I think just like so many of the reviews we've been covering him lately, I feel like he didn't allow himself to enjoy the product, and he was just looking at it so analytically that he essentially killed any chance of him having fun. So for that, I'm giving him a D.
Totally fair. This is where I have been back and forth with Roger, because at the end of the day, I get what he's throwing down, and he lands the key words brilliantly, just entertaining, seeing it for what it is, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, he gets so caught up in just so many specifics that are meaningless to this conversation and this critique with Gene. He gets sucked into Gene's world of defending it, of what this movie isn't about. The suit thing drove me nuts, because there's more to this movie than just arguing about how Dustin Hoffman
looks in a space helmet
to be in a suit. Like, who cares? Nobody is going to walk out of this theater saying, that sucked. Dustin Hoffman looked horrible in a disease suit. Nobody's going to do that. So I think I wish he would have gone further on where his initial thought went. And that's where this true defense is, where we started this episode, is it's popcorn, it's entertainment. This is why it's just gonna be fun. A movie that's fun about a disease. So I got to get him a bare miss at 2.5 stars.
Okay. Yeah. And you know what? I'd probably put the movie around that too. 2.5, 3 on a good day. All right, cool. Well, I did enjoy revisiting this, because I haven't watched this in a long, long time. Probably pre-millennia is like the last time I watched this. I don't think I've watched this since the late 90s. But I really did enjoy it. And like I said, the nostalgia goggles weren't necessarily there, but I think that the understanding of what it's referencing, the 70s disaster movies, and then kind of kicking off the 90s disaster movie craze, I actually enjoyed it a little bit more, because I recognize it more for that now than I did for the cautionary tale that I looked at it back in the 90s. All right, so next week, we're going with another controversial 90s classic, especially in the conversation between these two. A movie that I absolutely adore, but I'm not going to get into the reasons why. But let's just say it's a film that's had a huge reevaluation over like the last 15 years when it comes to its political themes, its satirical themes, and really just like what it means in the climate of, let's say, political dedication, but also being able to twist propaganda into entertainment. And that is Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers from 1997. Yeah, I'm glad that, hey, it's season 3. We should have done this a lot sooner, but I think it's a perfect time and the perfect film to follow up Outbreak. It's like we're right in the middle of the 90s. These two are full of different opinions of big budgets and special effects and what movies mean. They were really at each other's throats in the mid-90s. This is a really good pick from you. I'm excited to talk about it.
It's one of those that if you watch the review, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself, you almost do a double take on WTF. How can you look at the movie this way? I'll be as vague as possible on that. Right. So, but I can't wait for that discussion.
Right. So that'll be next week. So everyone, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Like, leave a review, leave a comment. We got some people who have discovered us lately, and they've gone back into our back catalog and then leaving some comments, and those have been a lot of fun. So it's cool that we're getting some people to go back and look at the old stuff. So keep that, everyone. We appreciate it. You can find me, Antonio, over at the Cult Worthy Cinema Podcast. My website is thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host, Justin Henson, over at
themoviewire.com.
And we will see you next week.
See you next week.